Welcome to Our Last Meal, the podcast on grief, loss, and food. I'm your host, Andrew, and every episode I talk with a guest about someone important in their life that they've lost and what role food played in their relationship. This week I have a great conversation with the host of the Culinary Convo podcast, Devin. Of course, given the nature of these conversations, I do want to warn you up top that there is discussion in this episode of death, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So please be aware if these are sensitive or difficult topics for you. With that said, let's jump into our episode. All right, welcome to Our Last Meal. My name is Andrew, the host, and today speaking with me is Devin Ream, host of Culinary Convo, an avid Oregon Ducks fan, and a cashew chicken connoisseur, which I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about that.
Well, I grew up in Southwest Missouri and in Springfield, Missouri. Traditional cashew chicken, it's like sauteed mushroom type of like white meat chicken with like cashews and peppers and onions and like good stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But growing up where I did in Southwest Missouri, we had Springfield, Missouri style cashew chicken. And what it is it's deep fried white meat chicken, sometimes dark meat, just depends. But it's deep fried in like a basically your traditional like southern fried type of like batter, and then it's put over fried rice. Usually you got like an egg roll, and it had a cashew sauce which in a way mimicked like gravy, but
okay.
it is very Asian. It's not American savory. Basically it's got oyster sauce, soy sauce, chicken bouillon of some kind. You can use better than bouillon, whatever it may be. And then usually some type of white pepper, black pepper, and you pour that over. You add cashews and green onions, and you're done. And it is crazy good. And it's nowhere. Even in the state of Missouri, if I go to St. Louis or Kansas City and I order cashew chicken, I'm going to get the traditional Chinese cashew chicken where it's just the sauteed like chicken. It's not deep
Yeah.
fried at all. And it's like, dude, what is this? And it just blows my mind. And I had that stuff like in my high school. We had cashew chicken. That was the Springfield style. And yeah, yeah, I'm a huge connoisseur of it. Anybody who knows cashew chicken like that, they immediately are like, yes, I understand what you mean. And it's, yeah, it's deep fried goodness. It's so good.
I gotta
Yeah,
tell you, I love, like, this is one of the things I love about talking with people, and especially talking about food, is you hear about things that you take it for granted. I think if you grow up with it, but just learning about what other people consider to be, or what they have as like a regional delicacy. Like I
totally.
honestly, I know nothing about Missouri food. The only thing I know is that I learned last year that there is a St. Louis style of pizza
Yeah. Yeah.
that uses
Provel.
that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
And
Provel cheese, and it's like cracker thin. So it's
yeah,
trying to be the opposite of Chicago. I mean, you got to go complete other way. And so it's got the Provel cheese. And I'll admit, my wife tried it for the first time a couple years ago, and she's Oregonian, born and bred. So she is just like, whatever, let's try it. But she's kind of one of these people. She doesn't like a ton of meat or toppings or anything. So she was like, "Oh, I'll just try the cheese pizza." And I'm like, "This is gonna taste like Velveeta with red sauce. Like you're probably not gonna like it." And she's like, "Yeah, but it's a cheese pizza. Like it'll be fine." And she tasted it, and she immediately was just like, "What is this? Like I don't." You're right. It's like Velveeta on a cracker. Like, what is this? And I'm just like, no, no, no. You got to have it with a million things on it, like sausage, pepperoni, peppers. Like, you got to have a ton of toppings. And when you do, that gooey, like, Velveeta type, and I say Velveeta, it's not a cheddar. It definitely is like mozzarella, right?
yeah.
But it's creamy, like it's rich cheese, very salty. And so it's like when you have it like that, yeah, it's totally different. And so emos is the big one. IMO, emos is like the traditional St. Louis style. And yeah, sometimes if you try to find it like in a Sam's Club or what have you, they'll have it. And the cheese, the way that they cut it, it's not in a brick, right? And it's not
Right.
even shredded like in a bag. It looks like ramen, like it's spirally looking cheese, and it's just like, what is, like, you can tell it's just the fakest thing
Like no cheese
ever.
should have this shape.
Right, exactly. Like somebody put this through a press and this shouldn't have been made this way, but it is, and we all love it. And then other people try it and it is a, like, you love it or hate it. Like
Yeah.
you either enjoy it immensely or you think it's an abomination and it should never exist. Yeah.
So, well, no, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And
Yeah.
whenever I first heard of this last year, I was like, well, I like pizza. I love pizza.
Yeah.
And I'm always down to try a new style. So I looked and I actually found a place in Charlotte that they claim that, okay, they have the St. Louis style. They have that, that specific type of cheese. And I tried it with, I think sausage, prosciutto, I think pepperoni on it.
Yeah.
I, I'll say it. This is gonna if I ever have anybody from Missouri listen to this, this will probably piss somebody off. But the first thing I thought when I tried to bite was Totino's, the Totino's
Right.
frozen pizza. That kind of
Totally.
processed taste.
Yeah.
It was good though. I like a cracker thin crust, and
Yeah.
it was different. I like the fact that you can have something as common as pizza and still find new ways to that people different ways that people are doing it. I like that. I'm also
Yeah.
going to say I'm glad that you clarified the spelling of emos because when you said that, the first thing I'm thinking is some guy with feathered hair, like listening to My Chemical Romance while
Right.
he tosses
Right.
pizza.
Yep, eyeliner, the whole nine. Yeah. No, no, more like, an Italian neighbor, right?
Yeah, okay.
Emo. Yeah. Yeah, it's like Elmo without the L, right? So it's just emo. Yeah. But it's an IMO. And I think it's a shortened thing of like a longer first name, I want to say. I can't
Yeah,
remember the exact. I know the little like logo, it's like this skinny, like almost scrawny looking Italian character with like a thin mustache holding a box of emos, and that's like the thing. And it's a chain throughout Missouri, but I'll admit it's mostly popular up near St. Louis. Like
yeah,
that's where it kind of goes. Yeah, otherwise everybody's trying to mimic either Chicago style or it's like your chains, right? So Pizza Hut, Godfather's, Domino's, like a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And pizza. I'll say so. As far as chain, I'm not opposed to a chain place.
Right.
I like garbage food as much as good food.
Yeah.
But pizza, there are so many places that out Pizza the Hut. There are so many.
Dude, yeah. Yeah.
I
And it's sad because when I was a kid, like Pizza Hut was like at least where I was, you were either a Domino's or a Pizza Hut kid,
Yeah,
right?
it's like
So
Coke
like
or
you're
Pepsi.
totally, yeah. And so like depending on what town you grew up in, you either had a Domino's or a Pizza Hut. You didn't have both. You didn't get both until like the mid 2000s ish,
Yeah,
usually. And so like our town was a Pizza Hut thing. So if you read enough books, right, you got the personal pan pizza. And then eventually they went to the PlayStation demo disc. Loved that. I thought
Tony
that was
Hawk's
an
Pro
amazing
Skater.
idea. Yeah, I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater and Crash Bandicoot, and it was like so formulating of my whole childhood. And then it was like I hit my teen years, and the buffet that they used to do slowly kind of like dwindled. Then they started doing like wings, and then they started pasta or something. And then I just remembered kind of like what you were saying. It was like there were so many other competitors starting to show up that it was like, yeah, man, you need a pizza castle at this point. Your hut is just getting crushed, man. Like this isn't going to last well for you. Like I don't know what's going to happen. So it's hard, but no, it's like you were saying, like there is a certain, like, it's quick, it can be delivered, and it's somewhat garbagey that it's comforting. It's just like it's like this little hug that it was like, I'm glad I spent that $8 to just, not make anything and satisfy everything. Like that's what I needed, you know?
I exactly. I'm sorry. Not comfort food does not necessarily mean good food. There is
No.
something really comforting about just garbage food sometimes.
Totally.
you and I were talking back and forth, through chat about hot dogs, and it's,
Yeah.
I told you I love a hot dog. I have strong hot dog opinions. I mean, really, I don't care, and I've told my wife this. I don't care how wealthy we ever get. I could win the lottery tomorrow. I could win
Yeah.
a half $1 billion, and the first thing I'm probably going to do is go celebrate by getting hot dogs. You know,
Right.
it's just
Totally.
something. Yeah, it's just something so comforting about some types of garbage food.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's one of those things like a hot dog. Like if you meet somebody that says that they don't like hot dogs, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, oh, are you like vegetarian or vegan or something? Like maybe you had like a tofurkey dog or you had like a carrot. Like I think that's what they're trying to do now is like grilling
Carrots.
carrots with liquid smoke. And that is supposed to be mimicking a hot dog, which is I haven't tried it. Who knows? It could be kind of crazy,
Yeah,
whatever. And it's like it's got a sweetness to it, which it's like okay, but you'd have to get the salty. So it's like soy sauce and liquid smoke, and it's like okay. Uh, Otherwise, if they're like, no, 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 I'm not vegan. I think that it's awful to have that many meats wrapped in a case. It's like that is sausage, my
that's the
man.
point.
Like, yeah, that's the point. Like you grill it and it's great. Like bologna's just a bigger version.
Yeah,
And it's like and it's one of those things where like I am a huge hot dog fan mainly because it was the thing that like my parents would make when we were done with like baseball tournaments or
yeah,
basketball tournaments. And it was like, we need to get home. I want to cook something because I'm not going to spend 20 to 30 bucks at a fast food place. It's going to be cold by the time we get home. Like, just we need something. So it was always like potato chips of some kind with hot dogs. And it was like, you can put it in a boiling pot of water. You can saute it in a pan. You can microwave them. You can grill them like any which way. You don't have power. Yeah, use a grill. Like, you don't have, I mean, any way. It's like you want to eat it raw. Like, you don't even want to cook. You don't want to turn on anything. It's midnight. You're like, I don't want to heat up anything. You can eat the thing raw. You're going to hate it, but you can eat it raw because it's already
exactly.
pre cooked most of the time. So it's like, it's just this thing that, like, I think it's an every person meal. And it's like you were saying, I've had strong opinions. My wife has always been of the opinion that she's like, Devin, those are death sticks. Like each one of those you eat is lowering your life by
And
however much it's killing your heart, it's killing everything. I'm like, yeah, I get it, but there's a snap when you bite and it's so good. And she's like, no, like you can't. And I'm like, no, but like the relish and the onions, like, oh, I can't get enough. Can't get enough.
I mean, and look, a hot dog, like, maybe it does take some time off your life, but is that a life worth living, like, without them?
Right.
There,
Totally.
I am all for eating healthy and trying to, I'll admit this, and I know this is an audio format, but I look like a guy that loves hot dogs. I know that.
Yeah.
I know that
Yeah.
about myself. I
Right.
do like to try to eat vegetables and try to eat somewhat healthy, encourage
Yeah.
my daughter to eat healthy. But there's just something about a hot dog. It's so good. And you
Yeah.
mentioned bologna. I'm from North Carolina. I grew up on bologna, fried
Oh yeah.
bologna
Yeah.
sandwiches. I even a couple years ago I'd never heard of this, but it's called a Oklahoma prime rib. It's basically smoked bologna.
Yeah.
So if you have
Yeah.
access to a smoker, it was, and I tried it, just scoring a whole bologna log, which is one of the worst sentences I think I've ever said. But
Yeah.
coating it with mustard and then seasoning it, I poured a little bit of bourbon in there and smoked it. It
Yeah.
was great. It not good for you, but it tasted fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is it's like it's one of those things where I think that like we've hit this point in time where there are things that we made that were supposed to be like calorie rich and super fatty and like kind of like a we're just doing this as quick as we can and you're working in a mine or in a field and so you're going to expel this before you ever reach the front doorstep when you come home from work and now that's not the case anymore. And so we get the smoked bologna, hot dogs, whatever it may be, any grilled meat, if it's got a fat content, it's, usually you're not working that off too well. And so it's one of those things where we're at this weird point in time where we've got a bunch of stuff that you've got detractors on the health end that are kind of like, it's too much sodium. You're grilling it, it causes a char that's a carcinogen. And then you've got all these things, and you're kind of like, yeah, but that's what makes it good. And then there's the other side that's like, well, I'm vegan or vegetarian. And so you have to kill an animal to make these things, or a couple animals,
Yeah.
depending on what it is. And you're like, yeah, I guess that's true. But like, I ain't the first one to kill an animal. Like,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of people doing it, and they're still doing it. And I'm not the one, out there doing it right now. And they're like, well, that doesn't excuse you from smoking the bologna there. And you're like, you're not eating it, and it was already made. So what are you going to do? That's a waste of an animal then. And
Yeah.
so you kind of have to balance it. And I'll admit, it's like one of those things where maybe there's a point in the future where we're only making so many bologna logs, right? And we're
Yeah.
only making so many hot dogs. And we're like, this is a one time a year like treat. And only so many people can get it because we're trying to reserve some things. And it's not just pure excess, right? And
See,
one day it'll be there, but it ain't right now.
yeah. You know, that's an interesting idea. Just like, I think 1,000 years from now, like let's say 200 years, we're at that point where a hot dog is a treat, and then 1,000 years from now, you've got anthropologists that are like, oh, in the Americans of the 2200s,
Yeah.
they would have the traditional festive bologna log
Right.
and hot dog accompaniment. Um,
Right.
this just so wild to me,
Oh,
and I'll
yeah.
say this. I'll say this, like the health people, I get it, but if you're trying to talk me out of eating a hot dog from a health perspective, I've made the decision. I'm
Right.
comfortable with it. I'm with you.
Right.
The vegan aspect, the vegetarian aspect of it, I get it. I respect it. I'm with you. I hate the idea of like of this food, this animal going to waste anyway that's already been killed. Um, I try to sneak in the vegetables everywhere I can, extra, and then my
Yeah.
wife and I, we've tried the meatless Mondays.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
it's that thing. It really is a wrestling match, I guess, internally of okay, you want to be ethical, but it's almost a cultural thing, and
It
that's
is.
probably a
Yeah.
flimsy excuse. I know that, but
Well, I mean, like, so I'm out on the West Coast, right? So Oregon, and I mean, Portland was rated like the number one vegan vegetarian city in America, right?
yeah,
I still see barbecue places left and right.
yeah,
There's an In and Out not that far from where I'm sitting. Like, it's one of those things like you're gonna find it pretty much everywhere because that was America,
yeah,
right? Like we've done this, you know, so it's one of those things you slowly progress towards kind of like what you said, like a meatless Monday, and then it turns into like I'll eat Beyond Meat or Impossible Meat here and there to substitute, this or that. And so it's just kind of like this give and take. And
yeah,
you're hoping you're making it up for those that are like, I want to drink the blood of 18 pigs, right? Like that's what you're hoping that you're doing is like by me eating, like a salad with, some type of like baked tofu, whatever, that is offsetting, Bill Bob Joe Bob in Tennessee who just ate half of a hog and doesn't know what he's going to do with the other half, right?
yeah.
Like you're hoping that's like the offset and you don't know, right? It's a big world. Like,
It's a
you know,
crapshoot.
yeah, totally.
I
You
guess
know,
you're hoping for a balance. I guess you know.
right. Right. And that's always been my thing is like I know Bourdain, he's a huge like hero of
Uh,
mine. I loved Anthony
Same.
Bourdain, but like he really despised vegetarians and vegans. He didn't like them,
Yeah.
right? He kind of was like, you don't understand, and I can see that point of view. I think my main thing has been the vegetarian vegan, they don't have like awful arguments as to
No.
why they're doing it, right? So I'm kind of like, if you can go that full bore type of thing, then do it. If you can't, you can be kind of, I think the term was flexitarian,
Yeah, I've
right?
heard that.
Where you kind of go in and out, and that's where I'm kind of at right now. And I feel like every like eventual vegetarian or vegan, they hit that point, or they just grew up that way. And if you grew up that way, you're like miles ahead of everybody else. Like you're just, and that's the thing is we may, figure out one day that it's like, yeah, we still have to kill a certain amount of these animals for these byproducts, for these things, and for these vitamins, nutrients, because you still have to take like a vitamin B12, I believe, or a B. There's a vitamin B something that is very specific to meats, like even Impossible meat with heme and everything, they can't make it. And so I know there's certain things like that. And if there isn't, there isn't, right? Like even better news. Like it's like awesome. We could all go full vegan. But you also have to realize like when something just tastes super good, that's what people are gonna go to. Like vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, carnivore, it doesn't matter. If it tastes good, people will flock to it. Like,
Ex-
yeah.
Nobody's eating McDonald's because it's the best version of a burger.
Right.
They're eating it because it tastes good.
Totally.
Yeah. I wonder that. So, you've heard of the lab grown meats. You mentioned the Impossible.
Yeah.
Do we get to a point where we have lab grown hot dogs? And
Totally.
I've never.
Yeah.
But here, you grow lab grown? Oh god, this is gonna be terrible. To listen to, but do we grow these lab grown hunks of meat and then make hot dogs? Are we able to just grow test tube hot dogs or test tube bologna?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. In your
I,
pantry. Like,
exactly.
like that's what will happen. Or in your fridge. If you had to keep it cold, like fine. But no, eventually it'll be like, here's one package of this liquid, here's this other package of powder. You mix the two, you put it in your like cheese and meat drawer, and a week later you've got an 8-pack of hot dogs, and you're
There
just
you
like,
go.
oh wow, great. And like eventually we will have awful commercials for that product. Like we
Oh god.
will. And it'll be like, teach your son how to grow hot dogs the traditional way. And it's like, they pull out the drawer and it's like, well, Dad, what's in there? And it's like, well, it's our hot dogs. If you want to grill for Memorial Day, we've got to get this ready. And it's like, like that's what you have to do from then on. And people will be like, how traditional is this? Oh, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. And like you were saying, anthropology, they're going to go back and they're going to be like, at Wrigley Field, they used to eat 30 of these at once. Like they used to do, and they're like, oh man, I can barely eat 2. I mean, we can only grow 8 at a time. Like, how did they do that? It's
Well,
just one of those things.
Well, what's better though? What's is it the 1,000 years from now? Is it anthropologists talking about the ritual of the Nathan's traditional hot dog eating contest and how they did this?
Right.
They'd eat 40 hot dogs in one sitting to ensure a good harvest. Is it that,
Right.
or is it the idea of I'm just thinking of the ballpark commercials? I'm with you there.
Totally.
Or
Yeah.
it just where does it even draw the line to where it becomes the lab grown meat's an ethical thing? Like, oh my god, I can't believe you'd eat that. Those are
Right.
those are living cells, kind of. So that's
Totally. Well, and
terrible, sort of.
and more than likely, depending on how well we caretake for our educational institutions around the
Yeah.
world and all those things, like sadly, I have the feeling that they're going to look back and be like, well, not only did they like slaughter all these pigs and cows and whatever, but after the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, most of them ate so many that they were eventually sacrificed on the New Jersey boardwalk. And you're just like, that's not what happened. But that's the thing is like, they're just going off of this stuff. They're like, there was a man named Kobayashi who never went to another one again. And we think it was because he was sacrificed. You're like, no, there was some conflict there. If you guys would read up, but they're not gonna know. It's like one of those things, that I think that it's hard to determine the lab grown part. If you're still using cells, I think you could say that it's made from just one carbon atom and everything is made from carbon, so we should need it. And it's like, well, plants are made from carbon. And then eventually they'll be like, yeah, we have to find something in space to eat. Like, that's where we're at. It's like, what? You
That's
know?
that's next level. It's like I'm a stage 4 vegan that I only eat nitrogen based items.
Right.
You know,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
but
I just breathe air and I'm satiated. And you're like, you're a liar. Come on. Like, that ain't real. There's no
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
And I will say, like, if anyone's hearing this and thinking, like, oh my god, they're shitting on vegans and vegetarianism, I'm really not. Like, again, I
No.
love vegetables.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
mentioned, like, in Portland and just these vegan restaurants, and so I just have to ask. I mean, because in North Carolina, they're around, but they're few and far between. How are they?
Right. Oh, they're amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
World class. Like, the thing that I've always been fascinated by is it's a vegan donut shop, and it was on the newest season of Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix when he's in Portland. And it's one of those things, like he was saying, he's like, I cannot tell the difference between a vegan donut and a regular donut. Like, there is no difference. It tastes identical. The flavors are all there. Like, why is it that we don't all do this? And it's like preference, ease of use,
Yeah.
distribution, the product lasting longer or not lasting longer. Like, there's simple answers to a lot of those things that if you put more effort into it, or you take away the hard part about it, you're going to use the other one more. And so it just took time, right? It's not
Yeah.
because we were just like, well, let's kill more animals. Like, no,
Yeah.
it was because, like, the way to do that way, it lasted longer. It made it to where I could buy XYZ products and it would last months, compared if I did it the veggie way, and I'm looking at like barely a couple weeks. It's, so, but like there's a couple places out here that they'll do a mixed bag of like half vegan, half just regular menu type, stuff. And you would swear like there's no difference. And perfect example, place out here called Pine State Biscuits, and they specialize in biscuits and gravy, biscuit sandwiches. Like, that's all they do. And they have a thing called the Reggie, and it is a biscuit sandwich with a cut of, like, imagine your Chick-fil-A, Popeyes chicken sandwich type of chicken with cheese, bacon, and then if you want a Reggie Deluxe, they add a fried egg and sausage gravy on top.
Ooh.
It's amazing, right? But then they have this other thing where it's basically a Pine State, biscuit sandwich kind of thing. They use, I think it's the Just Eggs, right? Or some type of egg substitute. They use like a vegan cheese. I decided I don't want to go sandwich. I don't want to mimic anything too crazy, tofu
Yeah.
bacon or whatever. So I was like, I'll just get the biscuits and gravy. That's like a comfort food home run
100%.
every time. But instead of the sausage gravy, I'm going to go with their mushroom gravy and
Oh
see
god, that sounds
if
good.
that's going to do it. Dude, I tasted my wife's and then I tasted mine. I would take the mushroom over the sausage. I was like, the sausage, it's not that the sausage was bad. It's just, it was rich. It was super rich. And so you try the mushroom one and there is something about it, how much black pepper, what they added into they have like Cajun seasoning in it. You can,
Yeah.
taste everything that goes into it. And you're just like, this is how, just because it's vegan, vegetarian doesn't mean that it can't be bad for you. It can be super bad for you and still be like, yeah, this is great. So it's like one of those things that I ever since I came to the West Coast period, whether it was Seattle, Portland, all that stuff, I in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna have to be more open to like tofu related things. And I thought it was gonna be one of those, like, you try it, you stomach it down, and you move forward. And you kind of have to like lie to other people and be like, yeah, no, this is great,
good.
Tom. Yeah, those Portobello burgers, man, feel like a Ron Swanson, right? Like everywhere you go. And instead, it's turned into this thing where it's like, you just acknowledge that it is different, but still very good. And that's
See,
like the main thing, is even though it's tofu, flavor's great. And it's just, it does not mimic chicken. It doesn't mimic whatever, but it's still really good. And you're just like, awesome. I can accept that. Like, that is fine, especially if it's cheaper. I think that's the other thing is
Yeah.
like price point. If it's more expensive, you've already alienated, most people, right?
Yeah.
They're just going to look at it and say, yep, nope, I'll still eat the meat because it's cheaper. Like, that's what I'll do. Like, because my bottom line, if it gets hurt, looks like
Yeah.
more, cattle are going to the wayside. And it's like, okay, fine. But if you make it the same price, if not cheaper, a lot of your excuses are done at that point. It's especially flavors on point, the price is on point, and it's healthier. You run out. You run out of options where it's like, yeah, I want the meat one because I
Yeah.
want to feel like a total dirtbag at the end of this. I want to feel like I can hardly breathe and I got the meat sweats. This is going to be great. And you're just like, no. And so I'll admit, out here, way easier than when I was back in Missouri, right?
Yeah.
We had a place called Jack Sprat's, I think it was called, and they were supposed to have more vegetarian options. So it still had dairy, still
Yeah.
had egg, I think, cheese, that kind of thing. I remember that place lasting barely 2 months and then it was gone. And that was like in the mid 2000s, right? And so I just thought, like, yeah, that place, none of those places ever coming back again. And then, like, I come out to Oregon and it's like, yeah, we don't have Jack Sprat's because that's like a very old idea. Like, we have moved on, like, to all these other greater, better things. And so it's like, yeah, you kind of roll with the times a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I think the big thing too is a lot of people that they're so gung ho pro meat, anti vegetables, which is
Yeah,
such an odd thing to me. It's if you hate vegetables, you just never had vegetables cooked properly. If you
right.
hate Brussels sprouts and all you've ever had is boiled mushy Brussels sprouts, you know,
Yeah,
if I just and that's I think if more people just had an open mind to it. My daughter's 5, and what I tell her is I want you to try things. You don't have to like them. It's
right,
okay if you don't like everything, but you need to try stuff. Got
right.
to try foods, and I even try to push myself to this. If I have something historically I don't like, it's been a couple years, I'm going to try it again just because, hey, maybe
Right,
my taste buds have changed. Maybe, I didn't have a good version of this the first time,
right.
but it's just a matter of being open to it.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah. It's like you were saying, it's like over time you have to be kind of present with how your flavor and your palate is changing. Because I
yeah,
know, like, when I was a little kid, everybody thought I was super weird because I didn't like chocolate. I hated chocolate. And it was like before the age of 5, chocolate hound could eat anything and everything Hershey known to man. But then it was like after the age of 5, between like 5 and 11, didn't really like chocolate and didn't like anything with nuts in it. So peanuts, almonds, walnuts. I was like, no, like get that away from me. Like, no, absolutely not. And so everybody thought that I was like the pickiest eater ever. And now I feel like everybody today calls me like the garbage bin. Like, I will eat anything and everything pretty much because I have a very hard time finding things that I dislike unless it's like on their own and I can't change it in any
yeah,
way. And so it's like one of those things where, yeah, you have to like slowly kind of push your edges out a little bit and see kind of where that balance is going. And I will admit, what helps a lot, especially when I was younger, was being starving. Like, you've gone all day and you haven't eaten. And a lot of people are like, oh, so torture yourself. It's like, no, just like work on a project outdoors, whatever it may be, for like a long period of time. And you're just like, put food in me. I don't care what it is. Just let me eat something. Because there have been things that I've eaten that I would be picky, finicky, whatever about it. And then like I'd get off work or whatever, and I'd drive through a drive-through, and I still remember it. I was at a Wendy's and I ordered just a straight cheeseburger, French fries, drink. Like, let me get my food. I want to park and eat this. I haven't eaten all day. Usually I would say like no mustard, no pickles, no onions. Like, I just want lettuce, tomato, cheese, burger. ketchup maybe, and that's it. Like,
Yeah.
let me be done with this. I didn't ask for any of that off. I was dazed from my work that I just was like, I am starving, give me food. And then I got it. I took a bite and I knew it was like, I just bit into a pickle and a huge thing of onion and mustard. I don't care. I get it now. Like, it
Yeah.
was like, it clicked in that moment. It was like, this is why people like it. Like, it adds way more depth of flavor. Like, the pickles, the acidity, the onion has this vegetal quality that has a crisp, like, crunch besides the lettuce. And then it's like, yeah. It's like, I finally, and you feel, I think it's like this thing where you're happy that you found it. And then there's that little bit of guilt where you're like, how many times did I tell my parents or whoever, like, don't put mustard? And if you saw even a little bit of yellow, you were like, I'm not touching it. I'm
That's
not
the
going
way
to
I
eat it.
was with mayonnaise.
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
But what?
nope.
So what I'm hearing is the key to an open mind is an empty stomach.
Yeah. 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 And trying not to like think about it too much.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if the thing comes to you that way, take a bite and then deduct what you don't like. Right.
See, that
Like,
makes sense.
yeah. Yeah. Like, basically, great example. Another one, Arby's, a chicken bacon Swiss. I am not a huge fan of like grilled chicken sandwiches. They always came off kind of slimy, kind of weird.
Yeah.
And I was not a huge fan of Swiss cheese. It smelled like a foot. I didn't like it. I was like, I like chicken, I like bacon, but I don't like it grilled. And I don't like Swiss cheese. And there was like a time, I can't remember, there were tons of errands had to be run, whatever. And I'm with my mom, and she's like, we'll go to Arby's. And I'm like, man, I've been to an Arby's like twice. I know I want curly fries. Like, other than that, I'm like, I really don't know what the heck to get there. Like, and everybody's like, beef and cheddar. And it's like, 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 that's a good one. Okay. But like, you have anything else? And so my mom was just like, try this, chicken bacon Swiss. And I'm thinking in my head, oh, it's a fried piece of chicken. Swiss cheese is cheese. I'm just going to have to go with it. And I bit into it, and it was like, okay, there's a lot of mustard on here, which once again, wasn't a huge fan at that point, but it was a honey mustard. And so that was like the slow progress of like, oh, mustard can not only be somewhat spicy, but somewhat sweet.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, oh, okay. And then it was like, I tried the chicken with the Swiss, and I was like, the Swiss does not taste like a foot. This is interesting. Like, wow, when you put it with other things, huh? And so, like, it's just that it's like I said, you have to like, my mom even says, she's like, just take a bite, and if you don't like it, like, I'll let you have my sandwich or my fries or whatever, or I'll make you something when we get home. And I'm just like, all right, fine, whatever. And then I took a bite, and I'm just sitting in that seat once again where I'm like, yay, I found this thing that's really good. But then there's the other backside that's like, dang it, I gotta admit my mom was right. Like, no.
You
Like,
never
I
do
don't
that.
want to admit it.
You don't admit it. You just say, "Well, I can muster through this, I guess. If I
Yeah,
have to.
yeah.
I don't want
I don't want to
to
waste
put
your
you out.
sandwich.
Yeah, I won't put you out. But
Yeah,
wait,
totally.
Devin, let's go ahead and let's transition a bit.
Yeah.
And so, the whole point of the podcast, our last meal, is we talk with people about, people that you've lost, loved ones, and then that connection to them through food, and that's been the basis of a lot of our conversations around food.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting, concept there. That food is something. It's even just in this conversation already. You can talk about memories. We talk about comfort food. And part of the comfort, I think, is taking you back to a place with a person. I think that there's a lot to tie us there. So,
Yeah.
who are we going to talk about today?
Like I said, today gonna be talking about my grandpa, Mac Davis. He was my mom's dad, right?
Yeah.
And big dude, really tall, big. I mean, Paul Bunyan-esque in a way. No beard or nothing, clean shaven, wore glasses, but he always wore overalls constantly. He was in World War II and the Korean War in the Navy. And even though he was like I said, he was super tall, like 6'6" or 6'7" or something like that, really tall. He was working on a submarine as a
Oh Lord.
communications person, so he's crouched down all the time, and it's like one of those things where like he was just this larger than life guy. I mean, he was, but he was a gentle giant. Like, just
Yeah.
I never heard him yell in anger ever. He would yell to call a dog or cattle or whatever in, but never in anger ever. And it was one of those things where like my mom would probably tell you the opposite, but I was the grandkid, so I got
Okay.
spoiled. So I was like, okay, but no, I mean, he was just this guy that like you could say anything around him and he knew something about it that you didn't know, and not in a showy off type of way where it was like kind of a one-upsman type of thing. It was
Yeah.
more of just like this thing of like, I find this part of that pretty interesting, and you'd be like, what? And he'd be like, yeah, because like this and this and that, and he'd go over it and you were like, I never knew any of that. Like, how did he know that? And so like he was big into education. He taught in Lafayette, which is a suburb of St. Louis. Basically, Lafayette schools. He was a principal and worked as a teacher and did all those things. I want to say he got his master's at Mizzou and became a principal after that and different things like that. And so he was in education his whole, mainline career after the Navy. And it was so odd because he retired into a farm, which is like, that is not what you do, right? You don't retire into something that's harder work than what you were doing before. Like, you don't do that. And that's what he did. He just was like, I grew up on a farm. I want a farm. And so that's what he did. And he had his garden, he had his cattle. I can't, it was somewhere between like, I think it was 8 or 10 cattle, I want to say. I always saw
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 nearby. I thought they were massive because I was like a little kid. So I always just thought they were monsters. I was just like, cattle. Like, but he had goats, he had rabbits. He raised rabbits for meat, which was like a older style of doing that, especially, the Ozarks where we were.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you did. You had this rat, you didn't have to hunt for it, right? You had rabbit and you had it there all the time. You would then slaughter the rabbit, skin it, and you could freeze the rest of the meat throughout your winter. And so very chicken like, right? And so that was like a huge thing that he did for a long time. He adored, goat's cheese, goat milk, always tried to get me and my brother to try it all the time. And we were just like, no, like we know it's acidic. We know it's like really
Yeah.
weird. It's got this tang. We're like, ugh. And now, yeah, that stuff sells for like $20 a disc
Yeah.
at a grocery store. And it's like, how did my grandpa know that? Like, it's just this crazy delicacy. We thought it was this weird thing. And he just thought, oh yeah, like this is amazing. And we were all just like, no, no.
See, I'm
But
with you though.
yeah,
I've never liked goat's milk myself or goat's
right.
cheese. It's just it's like you said the tang. I
Yeah.
will say I've never tried rabbit though. So did you grow up eating rabbit then with
Yeah.
him?
Oh yeah. Yeah. He all the time would make, with my grandma, he would make like a rabbit pot pie, which not in a pie tin, but
Yeah.
basically a top crust of pie crust in a square pan. And then you make your typical, like what you would consider like a chicken pot pie filling, but it was with rabbit, right? Or a rabbit stew with like egg noodles, right? And so it was
Yeah.
almost like, chicken noodle soup. There is a rabbit noodle soup, right? And so the way that I always kind of went about it was like, it is the perfect in between of dark and white meat chicken.
Huh.
It's right in that thin line there because it has the like saltiness of a white meat chicken, but it has the kind of the texture slick quality of like a chicken thigh or dark meat chicken.
With the best part of the
And
chicken. I think we
totally.
can. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And it's one of those things where like rabbit, I just remember he wasn't one of those people that was like, oh, we're going to boil the head and get all the fat and cartilage and all. He didn't do anything like that, but it was always, the chunks of meat that he could get out of it. That's what he was using. And then he would freeze it. And it was one of those things like we would walk along the rabbit cages that he had, right? And you'd see the rabbits and we're thinking like, oh, these cute little bunnies, and then it's like we get back into the house and he's pulling out this bag out of a freezer and it's just all this meat, and we're just like, oh, what kind of meat is that? And it's like rabbit, and we're like, oh, like,
Yeah.
oh no. And so it's like this kind of realization of like, oh man, like that's kind of where that comes from. But
Yeah.
at the same time, like it was unique because it was like we couldn't really get that anywhere else. Like rabbit was definitely, it's one of those meats like you have to find at a specialty place now. You're
Yeah.
not
You
gonna
don't
find.
stumble.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things like most people look at it as a pet now,
Yeah.
right? And so it's one of those things like for us, it was still kind of that old prairie type of eating where it was like, well, if I don't raise rabbits, I'd be hunting them.
Yeah.
So, at least with this, I'm taking care of them before something else happens. And of course, he had chickens, for eggs and all those things. He had his cattle. And so it was one of those things like going to grandpa's house, my grandma and my granny. It was like we'd go out there, and it was always like this thing of like when we were in the house, everything was kind of like this like anticipation of like, when are we going to go to the garden and see the animals? Like that was kind of the like next step always, was like, when are we going to go do that? And of course, like when you have a farm, he was waking up first things in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Like, milking cows, doing whatever. And then by the time we woke up, he's sitting in a recliner, right? He's
done.
yeah. He's like, I'm good for now. Like, I don't really want to say. And he had a couple dogs, and they were border collies, and one of them was a which we call black and white border collie named Mamie. And I just remember Mamie was always on the back porch, and I was terrified of dogs as a little kid.
Yeah.
Scared of cattle, dogs, everything that people love. I was just like, no, like I just couldn't do it. And Mamie, he treated Mamie like a child. Like he would walk out there and talk to Mamie and just be like, well, what do you think the cattle are doing? I didn't see that one go over there. I'm like, who's he talking to? Like, I don't even know what's going on. And so it was one of those things when he had the farm. Yeah, it was like a wonderland of like, we would go out there and we would see his hay loft that he had for the cattle. And we'd go out towards there, and that's where some of the goats would be hanging out. And so me and my brother, we had our own goats, Bert and Ernie, huge Sesame Street fans. Shout out. Yeah, hanging out in the hood in Sesame Street. We loved it, and we just thought it was so fun. I was always a big fan of getting eggs from the chicken coop, but not interacting with the chickens. Like I didn't want to interact with the chickens.
I've never heard of chickens as polite.
No, they are very territorial. Realized that pretty quickly. And then on top of that, I realized their beaks are not soft. They are very hard and pointy. And I was just like, I'm sick of this. Like, I just want to get your eggs and leave. And, looking back now, I'm like, I was kind of the jerk. Okay.
Yeah,
it's
it's one of those. Fair enough. I get it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, I get it now. But no, I mean, in the other part that like, I think now looking back, the thing that I realize that he did a lot of that I think is one of the main reasons why when he moved, basically as he got older, he moved away from like his larger farm, which was out towards Caulfield, Missouri, which is rural out there. It's near West Plains. It's out there. It's South Missouri, right?
Yeah.
And so he moved closer to us, a place called Rogersville. And basically when he moved there, about 30 minutes away from where we lived. And so he was closer, but he kept a garden. And I think honestly, out of all the things that he did, that was like his passion was gardening.
Really?
I think he liked the amount of work you put in, and there's not this immediate reaction, right? It was very much you're going to have to put, sweat and muscle aches and long mornings and trying to get enough water on these plants and hoping that it rains maybe a couple times and all this stuff. And there's a payoff at the end. Like you're going to see what grows out of this. And I think in a way to a lot of people, including him, it was like this nature's magic bounty,
Yeah.
right? Like it's this thing that like it shouldn't produce that much stuff, but it does as long as you take care of it and you kind of know what you're doing. You're not just neglecting it. And so that was like his big thing was the garden. Like, and I just remember as we were growing up, I mean, anytime we went over there, it was like we're talking old time of days, price chopper, price cutter. So tan bags with the blue and red lettering on it, or the like awful, almost navy blue Walmart bags with the yellow, like smiley face on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And those type of grocery bags filled with corn on the cob in the husk, lots of green beans, lots of zucchini, squash, cucumbers, tons of cucumbers. He loved growing those because he could grow it on a trestle that was like underneath this deck. And yeah, sometimes they would grow into weird, crazy shapes and grow inside the loops and everything. And he was just like, yeah, it'll be a fun one to cut. Like, like whatever. And so, he'd go through it, but he had, all these tools and stuff to do the garden and everything else. And so he had this little shop, right? And that's where he kept everything. And so it was like first thing in the mornings, anytime in spring and summer, you'd see him down in his shop and he's walking back and forth to the garden, back to the house, back to the shop, just going back and forth, setting up water hose, water lines, trying to grow everything. And it's like all these loves of food that I have that are just basic ingredients. So cantaloupe, green beans, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, definitely any type of tomatoes, which was like my grandpa and my grandma. My grandma grew it on her back porch and she had these boxes and grew tomatoes. And it was one of those things where it's like all these basic ingredients that I look back on, and then corn on the cob, definitely.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things where like I, at the time, I never realized how freaking lucky we had it. I mean, we had somebody in our family who was growing all this stuff and just giving it to us. Just saying, "Yeah, no, we got more than enough. Here you go. Here's like 3 Walmart bags filled with corn, filled with all this stuff." And he was giving some to like neighbors, people at his church every now and again. There'd be people that would stop by who were friends, whatever, or other family members, and he'd give them bags of stuff every now and again because he did. He always grew way more than just what he needed. And I look back at that now and it's like I said, you're just like, man, we were lucky. Like we had this immediate direct connection with not only the food that we had and we were eating, but it was good. It was really good. Some of the best tomatoes I've ever had, best corn on the cob I've ever had. Cantaloupe sweeter than anything I could ever get at a store. And I didn't think that was possible. But at the time, it was very just like, oh, yeah, it's my grandpa's garden. Like that. Yeah, this is, something from the garden. And I think as a little kid, you brush that off. And then now as an adult, I look back and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like how much work he put in and how
Yeah.
many hours and all these things that he did to get it going. And it was one of those things where over time he had been diagnosed with dementia and
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. And as little kids, I as a parent, I can't imagine the decision making that my mom and dad had to make. I can't imagine it. Where like, my parent has been diagnosed with this thing that my son or daughter, they're gonna see the changes. They're gonna notice, and it's gonna be painful, and it's gonna hurt. And I gotta tell them about it, but I can't like crush them with this, right? And so I just remember there was like a drive home. I can't remember if it was from a baseball tournament or whatever, but I just remember thinking it was really odd that my mom was like, you really need to hang out with your grandpa more. You need to do more things with your grandpa. And I'm thinking in my head, like, we have Sunday dinner with him like all the time. We go over there, 3-4 times a month. Like, okay, And she said something like, people, they aren't around forever.
Wow.
And, of course that hits with you and you're kind of like, well, yeah,
Of course.
I get it. Like, okay. But at the same time, you're thinking in your head as a kid, like, what does that mean? What does she know that I don't? And so, but as a kid, luckily your memory's kind of like a goldfish. It just goes away. And so a couple weeks later, you're going over there and doing stuff. And it's one of those things where like, yeah, it was like slowly over time, there were these things that like my mom would tell me like, no, you got to help your grandpa do that. Like he can't do that by himself. And I'm like, he does it all the time by himself. He goes out there and tills and does all this stuff. She's like, no. This year you're gonna have to help him. You're gonna have to go out there and do that. You and your brother both. You're gonna have to go out there and do it. It was like, all right, like whatever. I'm being like anywhere between the ages of 8 and like 12. Anytime your parents tell you, yeah, you need to go help someone do hard labor. Yeah, that always goes over really well.
So it's not
Especially
video
me.
games.
Right, exactly. Yeah, especially me who's like being all happy about Pizza Hut PlayStation demo discs. Yeah, I was Mr. Farmer Man. Yeah, I was, so it was like, oh geez. And so I start going over there, at least once a week, if not once every other week. And we're going back and forth and, we're helping them more and more with this garden, but we're also helping like mow and we're helping like organize things and like clean up things every now and again. And eventually it hit this point where it was like my mom had a health issue and then I had broke my ankle, and this was right at the beginning of summer. So
Perfect
it
time
was
to break
like,
a bone.
right. Yeah. I was like, awesome. Like perfect timing. And so they gave me this boot and I'm walking around on this boot and my mom's like, well, hey, your grandma, she's going to have, a knee surgery, a knee replacement type of thing, and I'm going to drop you off over there. And you're going to help them during the day for the next couple of weeks because you're out of school and that's what you're going to do. Like, this is what you're doing. And my brother, being older than me, he was in high school, but he had your typical like high school sports activities. He had a summer school thing going. And so I'm like sitting there thinking in my head, like, I'm going to be by myself and I got to like help with all this stuff. Like, and I'm in a boot. Like, I can't even walk that well. Like, and so my mom knows like this is not the best time like to be doing all this. And she's like, well, like basically you're going to have to help them with a lot of daily tasks and some of the things that they're doing, getting up and getting them, water or whatever they want to drink, whatever they want to eat, all those things. I'm going to take a sip.
Sure.
And I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, fine, I guess I'll do that. And I think my mom's way of framing it was like, when you're done with these things, you can just sit with your grandma and watch Game Show Network and like Nickelodeon, eat vanilla ice cream, do whatever you want. Like, but make sure you get, certain things done. And so she would either leave a list with my grandma, or my grandma would say she had a list in her head or whatever. And I would start helping with some of these things. But over time, I would be asking my mom questions, or she would say something. And basically, it just basically came up of like, yeah, your grandpa's memory is really bad. Like
Yeah.
he can't remember a lot of things, and it's kind of going in and out, and there's not much that we can do about it. It's gonna be really hard to keep him from forgetting things. And so that frustration of you asking something or saying something over and over and over again, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Like, you're just gonna have to get used to it. And it was like, all right, fine. And so you kind of deal with that. And really, besides like something going on TV and him being like, well, who's that? Like, what's going on with that guy? I really wasn't bothered by it. It was just kind of like, oh, grandpa, like, you're being forgetful again. And of course, with Alzheimer's or dementia, there's good days and bad days,
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where that's kind of what was going on at that time. And we're getting towards the middle of summer, and my boot, I either had it off or I was close to having it off, one or the other. And my grandma, she was still recovering with her knee, so she couldn't really get up, do a whole lot. And she was basically like, you're gonna have to like do more when you're cooking. And I was like, what do you mean? Because up until this point, it was like, Devin is like 12 or 13. I'm not trusting him with a very large knife. He can use a small one. And, we're going to get you as many frozen or, freezer or like fridge related meals as we can. And I think my grandma was like, I'm getting sick of this. Like, I'm eating a ton of like frozen pizza, frozen lasagna, frozen, like all this frozen stuff.
It's hard to go
And they
from garden
have
fresh to frozen.
right. And we've got a garden, and we have all these things that are good. It's just we got a 12 or a 13-year-old that really can't do anything because, my dad and my mom, they're working all day. My brother, he's doing his high school stuff. So it's just like, oh my gosh. And so finally, my grandma's just like, I'll help you cook something. You just have to listen. Like, you go in the kitchen and I'll tell you how to do it. And so it was like her chair is like kind of somewhat behind this wall. And I go around the corner, and that's where the dining room and kitchen are. And I'm in there, and I'm like, you know what? Fine. Like, I can do this. Let's do it. And so the first thing was like making like it was like a cheese, right? Like a 4-cheese rice-a-roni. And I just had to add broccoli to it. That was it. So it was very easy, like, to get into it first. And then eventually it got to the point to where it was like, oh, okay, we're going to buy bagged salad, but then you've got to add all the stuff that make a salad worth it. And it's like, oh, geez. And the way that my mom would say it is, you got to make a salad like how dad makes it. And I'm just like, oh, my gosh. So my dad, he's like this salad, I don't know, wizard. He adds just so much stuff that makes it to where it's not a salad anymore. And so it's like, he adds the cucumbers, cherry tomatoes, and he dices them. And then he adds croutons, tortilla strips, lunch meat, deli cheese. Like, it makes a certain type of vinaigrette or has a dressing of some kind. All this stuff, 3 different types of lettuce. So romaine, iceberg, whatever. I'm like, as long as I don't have to cut the lettuce, I can like shred carrot. I can do some of this stuff. Like, fine. So I start doing that. And so I thought I had really busted my hump making this salad. And I made this salad. And of course, my grandma being, she grew up in Arkansas. We're in the Midwest. I think she was a heavy, like, I want ranch. Like, I'm not, don't give me any of this, like, other stuff. Just give me ranch on it. It's like, okay, fine. So I do that. And I give her salad, and she's like impressed, right? Like, she's doing the
Yeah.
typical, like, grandma rah rah, like, this looks amazing, Devin. This is beautiful. And this is great. Oh, wow. Look at you. Like, you can't even tell you're wearing a boot. And I'm like, yep, I know, Granny. Don't you worry about it. And I start walking over, and I try to give the salad to my grandpa. And this is kind of where our last meal kind of comes in. Is the bad last meal. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you a good one. So it does end on a good note here, but
Yeah.
it's one of those, I hand him the salad, and him having, dementia or Alzheimer's. One of the things they don't tell you is that, like, they will bicker and argue over anything. And on top of that, it's like their body doesn't recognize when they are or are not hungry. That's just
Yeah.
gone. There's so many other things going on, what have you. And so that day was a bad day for him. And he is sitting in his chair, and he's got this duck lamp, and we have it now, but it's a duck lamp. It's like in this certain, it's like a porcelain, whatever. He's got all these, he's got change in there and paper clips, and he's putting toothpicks and stuff. He's pulling stuff out of his overalls and messing with stuff. And so I go to hand him the salad, and he's like, yeah, just put it on my side table. I'm like, okay, all right. So I do that. And then I sit down and I start eating my salad, and I'm proud of myself. And I'm like, man, yeah, this is an awesome salad. Like, I did a great job. Yeah. This is restaurant quality. Like, man, like, this is great salad. I gotta take a picture of this. Didn't have camera phone back then, but I was like, I gotta take a picture of this, show my mom. Like, this is, man. And so, like, I'm halfway through eating my salad, and my grandma's like, well, you gonna eat your salad? And he's like, what? And it's like, you're gonna eat your salad? And he's like, oh, I already ate. And my grandma's like, no, your salad's on your side table. He's like, I'll get to it.
Yeah.
And so he keeps fiddling around with other stuff that's on him, whether it's pins in his pocket or whatever. And then he starts watching TV, and now I'm like done with my salad, and it's still sitting there. And he's just like, well, what else are we doing today? And my grandma's like, nothing. Like, you need to eat your lunch. And he's like, I'm not hungry. She's like, you gotta be hungry. You haven't eaten since like 7 this morning. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is kind of awkward. Like, like, I don't know what to do exactly. And so I'm just like kind of sitting there, and I can tell my grandma's just frustrated. And so I put my bowl away because I'm like, okay, I'm done. And I grab my grandma's because I'm a good grandson. I'm not going to let her,
You'll take care of
it. Go put it. Yeah, go put it back. So I go back, and I'm like, Grandpa, you got to eat your salad. And he's like, well, I've already eaten. And I pick up the bowl, and I kind of not like push, but I kind of like put it up against his chest on his bib of his overalls. And I'm like, you got to eat your salad. Like, you haven't eaten since like 7 this morning. You got to eat. And he's like, well, I told you I ain't hungry. And I'm like, I think you're lying. And he's like, what would I be lying about? I'm like, I don't know. You need to eat your salad. And he's like, oh, okay. And he starts eating it. And I'm just like, did I just have an argument with my grandpa about eating a salad? And I had to basically do this weird loophole to get him to eat it. Like, that's kind of when it sunk in that it was like, yeah, like he's off. Like, he is not all there. And that's when, it kind of in your head, like I said, that larger than life figure that was so knowledgeable and had all these experiences throughout life and all these things it's not that it like crumbles or crashes away. It does. It brings a very conflicted feeling within you that you're like, as a 12 or a 13-year-old, I think the way that I questioned it in my head was, how did I just outwit my grandpa into eating a salad?
Yeah. Well,
Like, this is weird.
it's this feeling like as whether I think as when you're a kid or when you're an adult, when you realize that your parents, your grandparents, these older people that you always have looked up to and respected, they're human. They're not invincible.
Right. Yeah.
That's hard.
Oh, yeah.
When you
Yeah.
see like oh they bleed, they're not infallible, or there's something, or even just worse, this feeling of like there can be something they can't control. That my grandmother is right now early stages, mid stages. I'm not sure. She has dementia too, and it's you talk about they get frustrated easy, and
Mhm.
it's hard because I mean you it's like you said, you're trying to have a conversation with them, express something to them, and they just they don't understand. I think a lot of the anger or irritation comes from confusion and fear,
Right.
and it's hard.
Yeah, it is. And the communication that they had before is not there either.
Yeah,
And so, kind of like what you were saying, that not only are they confused and like frustrated, but they don't know how to express it.
yeah,
And so, deep down, it's like you feel like they are in their own little like cell, right?
yeah,
They're trapped up in their own emotions and their own, problems. And you don't know whether or not they even see that because of the condition that they have. And so, like I said, it's just conflicting. You just have this thing, and then you start like, what I kept trying to do is like, the second you start deep diving into that, there is like this fear of like, I'm going too deep. Like, I need to back out. I'm just going to hurt myself if I keep going down this far. Like, this isn't going to be good. And so you automatically, as deep as you get into understanding what's going on and everything that happens, it feels like kind of like this freight train of like, and then you hit this point and that train's going all the way back. It's going
yeah,
back into its station. It's not traveling again. It's like, nope, we're staying right there. Why? Because we went towards that tunnel and it was frightening. Like, we are never doing that again. And then you get close again and again and again, and you start to understand the tunnel a little bit better, that there is another side.
yeah.
But it's terrifying. It's just not something that is it's not something that people describe to you as something that has to happen while you're growing up. Puberty, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
There are movies for that. There's
Right. Bullying, yeah, that
yeah,
happens. Right. Teenage love, that happens. But a grandparent or whoever having you know, a type of disease or condition that they slowly just not remember who anybody is. Nobody really prepares you for that. And it's rough.
yeah,
And I I just remember that the good meal that we had, one of the last meals I remember
yeah. Talk to me about
was,
that.
yeah, so the good meal that I remember it was a little bit before the discussion that my mom had with me, where she said, you need to hang out with your grandpa more. And it was like, we went over there. It was the Missouri State women's basketball team was in the Final Four, and they were playing against some other women's team. I think at the time it was Alabama, I want to say. I can't
Yeah,
remember exactly, but uh, basically they're playing this game, and my mom, she went to Missouri State, and they all like Missouri State. And so we're sitting around watching the game. But during this, like, they're making mashed potatoes, green beans, all your typical fixings for everything. And I just remembered, like, my grandpa's helping in the kitchen every now and again, and he's, helping, cut the tops off of green beans, and then he's helping dice this and that, and then we have one of his apple pies coming, and I'm like I'm beyond jazzed. You know, LeBron at the beginning of games when he throws the chalk up in the air.
Yeah.
That was me at 10 years old or 11. Every time my grandpa was like, well, I made an apple pie. I'm like,
Game time.
yes. Yeah. Game time. Let's do this. Like, oh man, I am ready. Like I loved his apple pies. And so it was like everything that I thought of in my grandma and my grandpa food wise, it was like they were making that night.
Yeah.
And they made it. And we sat around the table. They had a wood table, you know, and everything. And we're eating. And I just remember it was one of the first times where I sat like at the table as like one of them. Like I wasn't just the little kid that was off to the side. Like, oh, I'm at the table. Like, oh, this is kind of cool. And so it's like me and my brother and my mom and dad and my grandma and my grandpa. And we're sitting around and we're eating and we're talking. And my grandpa was asking me about school. And it was interesting because at the time we did this for a good 4 or 5 years. Like I said, he worked in schools, right?
Yeah.
He had old school lunch trays. Yeah, like cafeteria lunch trays. And we would eat off of those all the time because they were easy to clean. You throw them in the dishwasher, they're done. Like it's not like all this other, you know, China and where you got to hand wash anything. Like, so we're eating off of like cafeteria lunch trays, all of these foods. And like, as much as like maybe my friends or like other people from the outside looking in would be like, man, that would just remind me of school. That's weird. Like, I can't think of doing that. One, didn't look like modern cafeteria. I mean, we're talking like 40s, 50s, 60s lunch trays. They are the weirdest pastel colors I've ever seen. They've got these huge segments where you can fit stuff, but they're deep. Like they're actually substantial. You can put stuff in it. So it was like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, sweet. So I loved these lunch trays. They were great. And so we're eating out of them. And so we're sitting there, we're eating out of the lunch trays, we're eating fantastic green beans with mashed potatoes. I think it was rabbit noodle stew, where it was the thicker egg noodles and everything. We have that in one of the segments. And then, yeah, very end, my grandpa's apple pie comes out. And he always, one thick apple pie, very deep dish apple pie,
Yeah.
had the top crust, right? But he had so much sugar and cinnamon in it, it was brown. I mean, it was like caramelized apples in the middle, dark brown. And I always thought that was normal. I thought that like that's an apple pie.
Yeah. Of course.
And it wasn't until after he stopped making them that I realized like, oh, other apple pies, they kind of have like a yellowish greenish center to it. And every now and again, one will get to like a tinge of yellow type of whatever, but it's never as dark brown and like broken down apples. And I'm like, and there's huge chunks of apple. Like with his, he cut an obscene amount of apples and he would cut it like thin slices after he skinned them. And so, I mean, it was just like you would put your fork through it. I mean, you were cutting through like 20 apples in one fork slice, like apple slices, I should say, not 20 apples, but 20 apple little slivers, you know? And so you were cutting through that. And so, I mean, it was just jam packed in there and I loved it. And it's like I said, ever since I last had one of his pies, I've never had an apple pie like that. And so like, I'll ask for apple pie wherever I'm at, right? And I just it kind of like with cashew chicken, right?
Yeah.
You have to know where you are. That's like so. Whenever I'm at some diner and I ask for apple pie, in my head, I'm like, I'm gonna get a subpar apple pie, and I'm just gonna have to deal with it. Like, okay, fine, because to me, normal apple pie was this thick apple pie that was a sugar, cinnamon, caramelized apple bomb that just had perfect crust top to bottom and was like amazing. And I can't find anything like that. Like, I mean, you look at special bakeries and different things, and they'll add cinnamon to the top, or they'll sprinkle on, you know, this and that. No, man, like they don't make it like that. And so I have to kind of like, I have to like talk about it and then tell my wife, like, this is what you're shooting for, because I'm not the baker. Like, I don't bake. I cook, but I don't bake. Like, that is not my thing. And so, like, there's a part of me that's like, well, you should be the apple pie guy. Like, be your grandfather and make these apple pie. And it's like, it's one of those things, like, I don't want to take over that title. It's too big of a crown. Like, I don't want to
Too
wear
much
that
pressure.
crown. Yeah, it's too much pressure. And so it's like, it's really hard. But I just remember that last meal, because it was everything that we had. We're all laughing at the table. Everything was all, you know, basically what quote unquote normal, right?
Yeah.
And so like everything was good. We were laughing about stuff, talking about old times. And they were talking about, you know, kind of like what they were doing during, you know, my mom and aunt's school days and that kind of thing. And so you go through all that. And then it was like shortly after that, we got my bulldog. And my bulldog, Ozzy, he, like I said, my grandpa, he had bred English bulldogs for, you know, years. And so we kept asking for a dog. And my mom was just like, no, like, you guys don't like taking care of yourselves, let alone a dog.
That's
Like,
fair.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. When she brought that argument up, room would go silent. Like, it was just like, yeah, you got me there. Like, all right, fine. And so, you know, but like basically, you know, my grandpa was like, well, you know, boys should have a dog. Like, and so he helped like pay for part of the down payment or whatever to get a bulldog. And so for the longest time, like our bulldog Ozzy, like that was the last thing that we kind of had tied to my grandpa for like a long time. Was
Yeah.
we knew he loved Ozzy, thought he was the cutest little brindle English bulldog ever, and he liked him a lot. But on top of that, like we just knew that was something he really liked and enjoyed. And so that's kind of the last meals that I remember with my grandfather, is one where, like I said, you feel conflicted slash kind of like bad, because it's like, I know that it's the kind of the title card of like, I know this isn't going to end well,
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
a
And then the other one was like, that's the one you keep in the memory bank, because that was reality. That's who he was. That's what
yeah.
he did. And he had many other dishes that he made. One was chocolate gravy.
Yeah, talk to me about this because I saw those two. I've never seen those two words side by side.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
told my wife I needed to learn more about this.
Yeah. So chocolate gravy, you can imagine like chocolate syrup, right?
Yeah.
Imagine the consistency. Instead of a syrup, it is like brown gravy.
Okay.
But then you put it on top of other savory things. It could be potatoes, it could be whatever,
Huh.
or dessert, either one. But imagine more of like a mole. So like a Mexican chocolate.
I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah. If you can find recipes online for it, I will admit I only ever had it, I think, once with him. And when I had it, it was, I think it was over like, I don't know if it was chicken fried steak or chicken fried chicken. And he had it with something else. And he was like, well, just dip this in it. And I tried it. I remember at the time just thinking it was weird because, one, like I said, 5 to 10, I'm like, chocolate? No, I don't want chocolate. But the other reason, I didn't look at chocolate as a savory thing. So I
Yeah.
just was like, I'm not dipping my chicken in chocolate, Grandpa, you freaking weirdo. Like, why would I do that? And, you know, but like, yeah. And then the other thing, he never really drank tea or coffee from what I remember. My
Yeah.
mom said, you know, every now and again he'd have stuff, but I remember one time he made red eye gravy,
Oh
and
Lord.
that's like steak drippings, you know, coffee, all that kind of stuff. So I remember that. And then definitely, like I said, anything with the vegetables, you know, the corn on the cob, all that kind of stuff. Like, I would swear that, like, if there was a corn on the cob, like, judging competition, what have you, like, he would have been a gem to get. I mean, because he wouldn't have been staunch or like too proud over the top about it. Like, he was more than willing to bite into some of his own like corn husks and be like, that one was really sweet, but the texture was just not, it's not perfect. I think that one was a little underripe. And it was like,
good, not great.
yeah, good, not great. And it was just like, what? He's like, this one, it's got a little too many white corn on it compared to the yellow. We need more yellow and sweet added in there. So maybe, wait a week or two and it'll be all right. It's like, what? Like, how do you know this stuff? Like, it's like I said, it was like a magician. And then in his shop, he had a, what do they call that? A nutcracker, but it was like a machine that he had. He helped build it anyway. And it was for black walnuts, and it would crush these black walnuts. And growing up, man, I thought black walnuts were just like, that is the oldest old man food ever. Like, I am never going to have black walnut. Like, why would I eat this? Because even as a kid, like I said, I didn't like nuts and things, brownies, cookies.
Of course.
I was like, yeah, no, like, I don't want pecans or peanuts or anything. And so he would always be down there with my brother. It was him and my brother. They would just crack these black walnuts all the time. And it was a thing where he could put it in there. It would crack the walnut and the walnut would stay there, but the shell would fall in this little basket. And so it was like easy cleanup, real quick. He was proud of this thing, like super proud of this machine. And he was just like, yeah, it cracks black walnuts. And he'd go crazy about it. And I eventually, when I was in my teen years, and so at this point, he's in like care facilities, right? Yeah. And he's, so he's not at the house in Rogersville or anything like that. But I'm working at Brahms, which is a Midwestern fast food place. It's got a grocery store, a full fast food drive-through, and an ice cream counter. All three. They're in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and Missouri. And Brahms, I would put it toe-to-toe with In-N-Out any day. I could say that being out in West Coast land, I don't have that California stigma where it's like, I grew up with it. Like, no.
You've had both.
I've had both. I love Brahms. In-N-Out, their veggies, top tier.
Yeah.
Crunchy lettuce, amazing tomatoes, onion. But anyway, the main thing is with Brahms, they had a black walnut ice cream. Stayed away from it forever because only old men ordered black walnut ice cream. It was gray. It was a gray ice cream with these little, chunks of black walnut in there. And there would be these old men that would be like, I will have a black walnut milkshake. And I'm just like, oh, God. No.
You're not getting black walnut ice cream unless your knee flares up when there's rain coming.
Exactly. Like there's old where you're like, I want vanilla. And you're like, bah. And then there's older where it's like, I want butter pecan. And you're like, oh, jeez. And then there was super old. And that was, I want black walnut. And you were like, oh, jeez. And so, but I'm not kidding. As much as I make fun of that, I was in like my last, like probably month working at Brahms. And there was one of those like quick nights where I think some church had let out and there was a concert and a football game and a million other things going on. So there was like a ton of people going through the drive-through. Somebody ordered a black walnut milkshake and they were like, well, no, I wanted butter pecan, whatever. And so there's like this medium black walnut milkshake and I'm about to go on lunch and I got a discount, but I was a high school student. Like if somebody said this is free, I took it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Totally. And so they were like, are you going on lunch? I'm like, yeah. They're like, do you want this black walnut milkshake? And I'm thinking, sure. Like I'll be really old for an entire lunch break.
It's
like,
priced right.
Right. Exactly. Perfect price. So I was like, all right, fine. I took one sip of it and I'm not kidding. I was like, I can't believe I made fun of this for so long. Like, this is an amazing milkshake. Not only is it an amazing milkshake, the black walnut is perfect. Like,
Right.
what the heck? Like, why did I hate this? It goes back to like the mustard pickle thing where it's like, you don't know why, but for the longest time, you're just like, I know I don't like that. And then you try it and you're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this is amazing. And and I'll admit, when I tried it in a scoop, right? Because I was like, I like black walnut ice cream now. And it's always one of the like ice cream tub things in our Brahms that is almost always full because nobody gets it except old men. I'm like, yeah, get me a black walnut sundae, whatever. And when I tried it in the scoop and it was like the actual ice cream, I was kind of like, it's okay. Like, it's not amazing, but it's okay. But anytime I had it in a milkshake, I was
Next
like,
level.
oh yeah, it was just amazing. So the next time you see some old guy getting black walnut milkshake, ice cream, whatever, you look at that guy and be like, he knows something. Like CIA, FBI, like he knows something. Because
Get some life advice from him because he could steer you in the right direction for sure.
Right, exactly. You're in a relationship at that time. You tap that guy on the shoulder and you're like, listen, guy, the lady I'm with right now, I might marry her, but I'm not sure. Can you take one glance at her and just tell me what you think? And he might turn around and be like, she's got bad credit. You're like, oh, no way. He's like, yeah, I'd ask more questions about that. You're just like, dang it. How does he know? Like, so yeah, I mean, they know something. But that, yeah, black walnut was another one of his like favorite things. And now when you try to find like bags of it, right, where you can, kind of like pecans or other things, yeah, it ain't cheap, man. It ain't cheap. So he was right on black walnuts, goat cheese, goat milk. Like, he was predicting this stuff in the 90s and early 2000s. Should have invested more in the knowledge he had.
He knew what was up.
He knew what was up. Yeah, he knew.
Well, Devin,
that was his thing.
I got to tell you, I appreciate you talking with me about him. Just from talking with you today, it sounds like he's an amazing man. Definitely, it's one of those things that I know losing people is difficult, but just hearing you talk about him, I can tell what kind of impact he had for you and just how much he meant to you.
Well, and like, it was one of those things where whenever he was in those care facilities and all those things, like I said, the larger than life guy, you see them slowly just kind of, I don't know if devolve is the right word, or you don't want to say like fall apart because it's kind of like, feel like you're talking about farm machinery or something.
Yeah.
They're not their usual selves. And and you feel like you're not, you go and you're like, man, I don't know. Like, I don't, this is just going to be maybe sad for me. And I don't know. And you get kind of selfish. You really do. You have to like somewhat think about yourself. Like, am I going to be able to really handle this? And I'll say, even in the deepest, darker times, whenever his care wasn't going all that well, because care facilities, man, it's a roller coaster.
It's hit or miss.
Yeah. And he was in and out of different places, but my mom did say, and she said it whenever we were, at his funeral. And your first episode, you mentioned whenever you saw, your grandfather, you were like, he doesn't even look like the same person. Right.
Yeah, he didn't.
And that's what I thought when I saw my grandfather. And my mom said, he lost a lot of weight. He had kind of gotten scrawny, and my grandpa was never a scrawny guy. I mean, he was big dude. And so when you see somebody like that, you kind of have to be like, yeah, there were just things going on. Like, you can't, really hold it to that tight of a memory in your mind. You almost have to remember them for what they, were before that condition started to really ravage. And what I remember, and my mom said it at the funeral, and he said it constantly, and it's something that, like, in the back of my mind, I try to always hold on to it, was me and my brother, he always, in a way, mentioned us anytime my mom or my grandma or whoever went, even if I went or my brother went. So like, what I remember was I went to this one, it was outside of St. Louis somewhere. It was a VA care. And we go in, and he's sitting in a chair, and he's like exhausted, and I can tell it's not a good day. But I walk in, and they give you these placard boards with a bunch of pictures on it, and it's, you know, your family members and different things like that. And so it's supposed to help them remember a little bit.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he would like study those before we showed up. I have no idea. He might have been. He was a big education person. He might have been doing that. But when I walked in, what I remember, and my mom said he did it every time, was I walked in and he goes, "Oh, hey, well, there's number 2. Where's number 1?" And so he was talking about my older brother. And, you know, or when my brother went, he'd be like, "Where's number 1? Where's little 2?" You know, or, "Oh, there's the big one. Where's the small one?" You know, like he always knew that he had 2 grandchildren, and that there was an older one and a younger one.
Yeah.
And it was like he always mentioned that every time. And so he would not remember my grandmother's name. He couldn't remember his daughters, so my mom and my aunt. Couldn't remember who they were. But it was like all the way up until the end, whatever it may have been, he always remembered 1 and 2, small one, big one, like whatever it was. And there was something about that, like I said, not only did it really, you know, kind of like touch my mom, that it was like, wow, they were that important to him. But I think it was just one of those things, like it was something that stuck with him.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people want in life. And as you mentioned, man, he did that to me and so many other people. He made a big impact, and he did a ton of things, and he was good at a lot of things. And sometimes you don't have to be good at things to be rememberable. But he was. And so that helped. But yeah, it's one of those things where like I'll dig in the memory bank every now and again, and there'll be old phrases that my, you know, wife will hear and be like, "That sounds like something that your Missouri is showing." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, you know, whatever." And so I'll have to bring up like that's what, you know, my grandpa FL or my grandpa Mac would say. And yeah, I to this day I hold a very fond like name Mac. He wore Big Mac overalls. Like that was his thing. And so like, you know, it's one of those things like anytime I hear somebody say, "Yeah, you know, Mac," a lot of people think semi truck. But I'm kind of like, no, that's a good name.
Yeah.
That's a good, strong Midwestern name is Mac, you know? So it's just one of those things. It made a big imprint. And like I said, to this day, I want a garden.
Yeah.
Like big garden. I want to make all the mistakes. I want all the failures, right? I want all those things to happen so that hopefully when I get to his age, you know, 70s, early 80s, whatever it may be, I hope I'm at the point where I'm doing the same things he was doing.
Yeah.
That's kind of a goal. It's like that would be great. With climate change things, maybe I won't be able to, you know, get to
That's
that.
like, yeah, that's kind of a crapshoot, but I'm right there with you. I got my fingers crossed.
Right, right. You know, you gotta try, and it's just one of those things. Like I think that it's just something that it's like an old homestead thing that they did. And like I said, you grew up Great Depression, you know, World War II, all those things. Same with my grandma. And so she did a lot of canning, you know? And so it's like, I look back at that stuff and I'm just like, man, that is retro. That is vintage, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what's in now.
Definitely. Yes. Ever since the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Like getting back into that thing. That way you don't have to go and buy it because everybody might buy it out, right?
Yeah.
And so you're like, yeah, it's
you'd
just
walk
great.
you could walk outside your front door and now throw a rock, you'd hit somebody with a sourdough starter and some canned vegetables, probably.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's like, what was it? one of the neighbors that we had, he it was like towards the beginning of the pandemic. We were walking to get mail, and he was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm doing all right, whatever." And he's like, "Yeah, we may be knocking on your door soon. Like, we may need to be getting like paper towels or TP or something, like all these places they're running out." And I'm like, "Yeah, like I noticed that. Like, there's a lot of places that are having issues with that." He's like, "Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just kind of crazy." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm just sitting there thinking in the back of my mind, like, I never thought, you hear sugar, flour, uh, I don't know, car tools, mechanic stuff.
Yeah.
That's what you usually ask neighbors for.
Not toilet paper.
Yeah. This guy's like, "I need something to wipe my rear end, and I ain't got nothing. Like, I need,
I hate to be a bother, but you got some 2-ply you could spare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Can you spare a square? Please spare a square. Like, I need you to spare a square. And you're like, "Oh, come on, man." Like, that's when you whip out, if you had to be really frugal, that's when you whip out I'm a bidet man. Please.
Yeah.
I don't do those things.
I don't want you to think I'm trying to imply that I'm better than you, but I am.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I don't want you to think that I'm living, above my means, but I very much am.
We don't take number 2s over here. We take number 3s. That's how fancy we are.
Right. Sometimes we make it a quadrangle. That's what we call it. Yeah. So it's but no, I mean that's the beauty of it all, is that all these things are going to change and evolve. And now, like, the thing that I was thinking is, with climate change and stuff, kind of like with the garden, maybe I'm growing like Indian corn, right? So the red, purple, whatever varieties, because they might be more tolerant to high heat, right? And then
Yeah.
instead of like cantaloupe, maybe honeydews are better at doing whatever. And so even if it's different, you can still make a good go of it. And that's kind of what I think everybody's going to have to try to do.
We should all start, regardless of where you are. I'm thinking maybe we all need to start, planning what kind of crops can you grow in a small space in a tropical climate.
Totally.
I guess we need to get ready to evolve.
Yeah. I sit back and I'm sitting here thinking like watermelon, cantaloupe, corn, green beans. Who knows? My grandkids might be like, "Oh, Grandpa Devin, he was just a mango fiend. He grew so many mangoes and so many papayas. It was insane, And I'm just like, who knew? I was growing mangoes and papayas. How did that happen? They're like, "Well, the papaya TikTok trend back in 2021, it gave him the idea. He started selling papaya oils. Ugh. He always tried to make me eat oat milk. He was weird." And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah. I go full with the oat milk. We always keep oat milk in the fridge. I go full dad joke on that every time, trying to figure out where are the udders on the oat.
Right.
My wife, she rolls her eyes a lot at home, but
tell her it's in the roots. I'm pretty sure they have to go underground and tug on the roots. That's where you're heading. Yeah.
Well, hey, Devin, I appreciate you being on today. I want to give a couple moments here at the end. Anything you want to promote to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. My podcast, Culinary Convo, we go over history, culture, different dishes throughout history. We have a thing called Plate in Time. My next episode of Plate in Time, I'm pulling out dishes from 1863.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I've gotten a few. I don't know if we're still eating any of these, but they are dishes from 1863. And then our popular one is Mapping the Culinary World, where we go to different countries each time, and we talk about the foods there and what it costs to travel, and if you can travel there. That's kind of a big question mark. But yeah, so there's that. And then my wife, she does a segment, Retro Recipe, going over recipes mainly from the 40s, 50s, 60s. She's a big what do they call that? Postmodern or mid-modern, whatever. She likes that era, the 40s, 50s, 60s, people who had money and a house and all that stuff. She likes that era. And so it's like one of those things we go over recipes. The last one was a buttermilk waffle recipe, and I can't rave about that enough. Oh, it was so good. And then the other thing, just anything dealing with Alzheimer's research or funding it, whether it's one that you prefer to pay into, whether it's volunteering at, whether it's a nursing home or a care facility, just to sit with those folks and hang out with them or whatever it may be. And then, like I said, donating to charities. Like I said, the money going to that research, I think one of the things that people forget in terms of research, not only with whether it was the vaccines that we're getting today for COVID, flu, whatever it may be, time is a factor. And that also means paying scientists for their time and the pressure it takes to get it right and to make sure that they're, making sure they're getting everything down. And so giving money to that, it can feel at times like an endless drain, right? Kind of like cancer research. It's like there's always a fun run. There's always something that I can be donating my money. They need it. That's what's kind of hard and sad about the whole thing is they need it. And so anytime you can give to, cancer research, Alzheimer's research, anything dealing with that, I'm always hearing about different little improvements or things that they're finding here and there. And with somebody in my family who had dementia, Alzheimer's, you get that feeling of like, thank you. Like, man, I'm glad they're making progress. It may not help the family members that have had it, but it may make it easier for hopefully not, but me or my loved ones who, because it's one of those things where I think, cancer, Alzheimer's, a lot of those things, it doesn't just take a toll on the person. It takes a toll on the whole family. And it's one of those things everybody in a way has to work around it. And so if you're the person who has Alzheimer's or cancer, sometimes there's that feeling of I'm a burden. And no one should have to feel that, for one. And two, it's one of those things where when you have research that helps with the care, it makes their lives easier, which in turn makes everybody else's life a little easier. The nurses, the doctors, the family members, when you have good medications, good treatments, it leads to better care, which equals a better quality of life. And so that's amazing to have. And so that's just what I want to promote. Culinary Convo, my podcast. Got to throw that out there. I'm being greedy. Listen to it all the time. Like, just get on there, put your headphones on, listen. I don't even care. Like I said, some people look at TikTok or Instagram when they're on the toilet. Listen to my podcast. I don't care. Do that, whatever it may be. And then also, more serious side, fund, cancer, Alzheimer's research, all those things. It's really amazing. And like I said, I enjoy your podcast thoroughly because I can't agree more with you, man. Food and, the last meals you have with folks, loved ones, people you care about, even if they haven't passed and you just feel like you lost touch with them. I have a friend at U of O. His name was Young Sung Lee. He was a master's student and he was from South Korea. And he was like my introduction into Korean food. And he made a huge impact on me. And I was only really hanging out with him for a good solid year, probably. And I don't know how many times I've tried to look him up on Facebook, on whatever it may be. And it's difficult because it's just one of those things where, he was a very private guy. He didn't, really, it was one of those things where me and him, we would talk and hang out, and I helped him get a desk from IKEA in Portland. And anyway, it was one of those things where like I drove him back and he was so kind to me all the time. And I think he thought I was being amazingly kind to him. But one of the things that me and him shared together all the time was food. And like I said, I think, loved ones, people who have passed, food, other cultures, food is the thing we all have, but it also is the thing that all connects us to humanity. And I think that it's something that we all need to connect with more often, So I appreciate coming on. Thank you.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more about the just food and how it connects us. I mean, the reason I came up with this concept, the reason this means a lot to me is when you think about people that have meant a lot to you, and this could be me, but I think it rings true with a lot of people. If I think back on people that have meant something to me that I don't see anymore, that aren't around anymore, I mean, one of the places I gravitate to immediately is what kind of food did we share? What kind of meals did we share?
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
to have people come on and just honor somebody that meant a lot to them and talk about that food that they shared, I mean, it means a lot to me to get to hear these stories. So I appreciate you being here.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I said, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's, I'm hoping, throughout a lot of this stuff with everything going on the past couple years, and then now with all the things going on in food media, especially today, I'm, I'm hoping that it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, people can connect more with those things that, you can indulge,
Yeah,
right? And it doesn't have to be a guilty thing, right? You can just
yeah.
indulge, and it's going to bring back the good memories and the good things. And no guilt needed, right? Like that's the way to go. Eat your hot dogs, people. Eat them. That's what we need. More
I
hot
think
dog eaters.
I don't think I can end it on a better note than that. So with that being
Yeah.
said, eat your hot dogs.
Yeah.
Devin, I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
That's all for today. I do want to thank our guest, Devin, for sharing his story and honoring his grandfather. You can find his podcast, Culinary Convo, wherever you stream your podcasts, as well as culinaryconvo.com or Culinary Convo on Twitter and Instagram. You can also follow Our Last Meal on Twitter and Instagram at Our Last Meal Pod, or visit us at ourlastmeal.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can also reach out by clicking the Share Your Story button at the top of the page. And until next time, please take care of yourselves and share a meal with someone you care about.